evening, everyone. Welcome to the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts. My name is Shannon Carroll, and I'm the Director of Museum Education and Community Engagement here at the KIA. Thank you for joining us for tonight's ARTful evening program, which was made possible through the support of the Terra Foundation. Tonight's program is inspired by art, music, and feminism in the 1950s, which is on view here at the KIA through May 7th. If you're intrigued and want to learn more about the art, music, and pop culture of the 1950s, I hope that you'll join us this Saturday, March 25th, for our annual symposium, which is focused around the exhibition. We'll meet here in the auditorium from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m., and tickets are available at kiarts.org. This evening, we're focusing on the music of the 1950s with our guest speakers, Dr. Michelle S. Johnson and Meagan McNeal. Michelle Johnson, also known as DJ Disobedience, is the co-founder of the Institute of Public Scholarship, the founder of Playgrown, and the co-founder of FIRE Historical and Cultural Arts Collaborative. She is also a contributor to the forthcoming catalog for the Art, Music, and Feminism exhibition, and she will share her curatorial process and perspective with us tonight. Joining her in conversation is Meagan McNeal, a singer, songwriter, and recording artist from Chicago, Illinois. Locally loved here in Kalamazoo and across the country, Meagan renders soul, jazz, and R&B, and has received national and international acclaim on stages as wide as the Chicago Symphony Orchestra and NBC's The Voice in 2017. Please join me in welcoming Michelle Johnson and Meagan McNeal.
I give him all my love. That's all I do. And if you saw my love, you'd love him too.
Well, I'm so happy to be here. This has been hours and hours and hours. If you are familiar with the playlist that goes with the exhibit, it's a 6-hour playlist. And tonight we're going to try to condense that into 1 hour. It started out with 35 women vocalists and musicians, and we got it down to 6. Okay, so you can imagine the agony I've been in over the last 6 months, trying to narrow it down to people, to women of significance. And Esther Phillips is the person that I landed on. Esther Phillips, who you just heard, and I Love Him, who is 1960, is the first female vocalist that I ever remember very vividly. And I think I was 3. And at 3, I had a position on whether Esther Phillips was better than Gloria Lynn, right? And I was very clear about my favorite, and that was Esther Phillips. And this process has been an incredible process of being able to engage these women that influenced me very deeply, coming from parents who were significantly committed to the arts, significantly committed to music, and the people who introduced me first to Esther Phillips. And so that is my point of entry into this conversation. And so out of all of the women that I could have chose, we focused on 6 of them tonight, and you'll hear from them. And so if you think, oh, what happened to, she's in the 6-hour playlist. What are you playing, Annie? She's in the 6-hour playlist, okay? So this was an incredibly difficult process to curate these artists that so significantly impacted music and the genres that we continue to embrace. And so I am so deeply, deeply, deeply happy to have my dear friend and co-cultural producer over, you might even be able to tell people better how many years, Meagan McNeal. You heard the background of the kind of work that she's done, but we go way back, and so maybe we could talk just a little bit about how we got to this stage. So Meagan McNeal, y'all.
1, 2, oh, there we go. Hi. I am so honored to be here in Kalamazoo. Kalamazoo, even though I'm born and raised in Chicago, Kalamazoo is home for me. Without Kalamazoo, there is no grace stages like you shared. This is where I got my start. I sang in church back at home, but on August 18th, 2008, I walked through the doors of Fire Historical and Cultural Arts Collaborative, and I met Michelle Johnson, and I met Denise Miller, and we did our very first concert. And I'll never forget, Michelle handed me a glass of champagne and said it's gonna be a great show. I think we made $75 between the 20 people that were performing. The person that laughed the loudest because she was in that crew. But you couldn't tell me after that we just couldn't make a living of this. I said, wow, we get to be paid for something that we would do for free. That was a game changer. And Dr. Michelle Johnson instilled the passion-driven economy in us, and I just never looked back. And so thank you so much for this full circle moment. Since that day in 2008, this has been my full-time job. Like, this is still a dream come true. So I'm very happy to be here and to, while admittedly, Dr. Johnson, DJ Disobedience, she's the scholar, but I hope to give some of the insights or the thoughts that I have about just being a woman in this industry, and I'm excited to share and get into it.
So I am so excited for you to be in this conversation, particularly about Esther Phillips, because as I mentioned, this is my point of entry into music and the point of entry into Black women vocalists and women vocalists more generally. So this process for me has been an incredible experience of discovery, even though I've been very rooted in this music because of my parents from the cradle, quite frankly. There's been so much that I've learned in these last 6 months. And so I've had a number of discoveries. Let's talk a little bit about any discoveries that you've had and engaging as I keep sending you, here's some more music, here's some more music, here's a 6-hour playlist. I got it narrowed down to a 3-hour playlist.
Well, I think to start with Esther Phillips, since that's where we are, I was really blown away by the continuum of her style. So starting with I Love Him, and then we got to her cover of Use Me, and then everything in between. So the very traditional kind of jazz, single vocal style, and then I was listening, because again, it's a 6-hour playlist. Okay, so I'm doing things around the house, and I listened, and then I heard some layered vocals. And I said, oh, Esther Phillips did this style too, and then you listen to some more, and then gets into some James Brown sounding things, or what we've tuned our ear to be James Brown sound. And it's like Esther Phillips was doing that. And then to do the cover of Use Me, she just went everywhere. She was not contained at all. And I think sometimes you feel like you have to be contained in one space. And so I was really, and I can only imagine that was even more so during her time, but she wasn't contained at all. And I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Well, let's play, hopefully, this is a 1950s phonograph, and so I'm hoping it holds up, but this is Esther Phillips during summertime. Summertime. Esther Phillips enters the scene. A number of people have done this, not very many people up to this point, probably about 6 or 7 people, refiguring the interpretation of Porgy and Bess. And this is particularly important because Porgy and Bess was white people's interpretation of Black people, right? And so Esther Phillips comes here and hits it hard and says, no, this is about Black people, in my interpretation of it. She relinquishes it from the interpretations of George Gershwin and then extends it to this conversation that roots it in Black experience. So, and it has become a classic, right? Like, you can't be a vocalist and not have something to say about Summertime. So, Ms. Meagan McNeal, what do you have to say about that?
Well, you're right, because my first experience with Summertime, again, right here in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I got my first gig, and it was for a really prominent trust band here. And again, I'm in college, and they said, oh, Meagan, you got a band, you want to do a gig? And I said, yeah, of course I want to do a gig. And I had learned from an internship to ask, what's your budget? As opposed to giving a fee. So I said, what's your budget? They said $1,000, and I thought I was rich. I said, what do you want us to sing? They said, you gotta sing jazz. I was like, oh shoot, I don't know any jazz, but I'm gonna learn some jazz today in order to be rich. And I called back home to my friends in Chicago, and I said, listen, I need you to teach me some jazz, and I need to learn it now. It's $1,000 on the line. And they gave me a list of maybe 8 tunes, and Summertime was the top of that list. You have to know Summertime if you're gonna be a singer. And sometimes you just get so sick of singing it, but it's a classic, it's a standard. And so, again, I think this speaks to how Esther Phillips, she was boundless. She didn't live within, or at least from what I've been learning through this, and there's still so much to learn about her career and her life and how she lived it. But just from the sliver of music that I have been consuming through this project, she knew no bounds. There were no rules for her. Whatever she felt in her spirit is what she did, and that really inspires me. So those times that quietly I feel confined to boxes, I really do try to step outside of them, and then you can look at folks like Esther and know that it's okay to be that way.
So do you have a clip of Summertime that you would like to share?
Sure, I can sing a little Summertime. Summertime and living is easy. Fish are jumping and the cotton is high. Your daddy's rich and your mom's good looking. So hush, little baby, don't you cry.
Check. Let's see.
Check 1, 2. Well, I think Esther would be quite, Esther Phillips, Ms. Phillips would be quite impressed with that interpretation. So one of the things that I think is fascinating about Esther Phillips is not just that she was an artist that created the covers, like created the classics and recreated the classics, but she was significantly invested in the politics of race, especially that were happening, because remember, she is coming up in the 1950s, right? And so I'd like to share with you, I should back up to say that much of this curatorial process has been about excavating the stories and the voices of the women who told their stories. Lots of people have talked about Esther Phillips and talked about Big Mama Thornton, talked about all of the artists that we'll talk about tonight, but it was essential to me as an oral historian to try to pull those stories out of the sources that presented their narratives as central to interpreting their music. And so that was a good deal of effort. But this interview is one that I'm most excited about out of all of them, because Angela Davis interviewed Esther Phillips in 1977, I think it is. And I'd love for you to hear what she shared with Angela.
Yeah, it's not about breaking even, it's about making some money, you know, to pay the rent, to eat. Same thing with everybody else. I mean, there was a time when you go on the road and you just break even. Yeah, it's not about breaking even, it's about making some money, you know, to pay the rent, to eat. Same thing with everybody else works for. You know, so now it's getting better, the rooms are getting better. You know, I find some clubs are difficult to work because a lot of trouble is considered performers, and then black performers, and then black women is commodities and property, and it's something that you buy and sell and make money off of. You know, they have yet to learn that we're not about that at all. You know, we are human beings, we are individuals, and we can think, and we have the talent. It's hard. Sometimes you go on strike. Sometimes you break down instruments. You know, we move on stage. It's a huge singing field we can. Sometimes you get up on stage and tell the audience to go back and don't get their money back. 900 people. Because I'm not saying that. I mean, there's several ways that you deal with it. It's not, I mean, it's the way it is. It's not a nice way, but neither are the clubs. So you do that only in clubs that are not nice to you. When they give you a toy to change your clothes in. You say, oh yeah. Okay. You still want to give you a little office boxes all over your head and say, this is for you. The club has top priority, a little public. Yeah, you still learn for that. And you know, it doesn't get any better because you know, it just doesn't. I mean, that's the way it is. Because when you dress up, well, I have built 9,000 dressing rooms in my career. I have built them, honey. Believe me.
She's built 9,000 dressing rooms in the course of her career. And I love this because she's talking about the element of resistance. I don't know how much that is shaped by her conversation, her awareness of who she's speaking with, and speaking with Angela Davis, but nonetheless, her work as Home is Where the Hatred Is, Esther Phillips was significantly influenced, not just by these experiences, but she talks about traveling through the South and going to Biloxi in the early 1950s and the kinds of permutations that folks had to engage in to be able to live in that environment, but also saying, you know, if they didn't allow us to use the bathroom, we did not fill up our bus. And so I think it's so important to think about the ways in which these women are having to navigate not just their artistry, but the social terrain of civil rights. Looks like you got something to say. Yeah.
Well, I think it's so fascinating how the more things change, the more they stay the same. Like, I can't count how many bathrooms or how many times I've had to change in the car on the way to a space because there's no space for art. It's only on the stage where you can be bringing the money in for folks. And I think understanding that, because admittedly, I can be a little naive at times. The people that know me to be, I kind of have rose-colored glasses, and I've been learning to remove those. But it's kind of like when you don't have that in your heart, it's hard to see and it's hard to believe until I've got a good friend that calls every rose needs a thorn, right? So if we would consider me to be a rose, not because it's the most beautiful part of the flower, but just because I don't really have a lot of thorn tendencies, right? But I've got people in my camp that'll cut you. And you have to have the people that have that very pure, rose-colored lens on the world. You gotta have folks that see right through it and be like, nope, no. So where I will walk into a venue like, oh God, it's gonna be great, we're gonna have an amazing time. And they're like, yeah, you can get dressed right over here. The people in my camp are like, no, we won't, and we can leave. you know? But it's 2023 and we still deal with that, which I think is mind-blowing. But you can feel like a commodity. And then you remember like, wow, I really thought I was human in here, and that's not how everybody views you. It's like you have something that can bring us notoriety or bring us money or bring us whatever, and not really tending to the folks that are doing the work. And so to hear her in those ways, and to hear the conversation between like some of our artist friends who really can see through the bull, for lack of a better term, it'd be so similar. It's really wild.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. So Esther Phillips has this significant impact and grows and becomes an artist over the next 40 years, really, in her life. But at the same time, she has significant influence on some folks. And with her partnership with the Johnny Otis Band, she decides quite spontaneously to join the Johnny Otis Band and goes on tour. And she creates this song, Double Crossing Blues.
If I don't feel you deep, goodness knows all that's right. Oh, baby, you can feel, and I see it too. When I with you, baby, I'm not so young with you. If you would only feel me right, if I don't feel you deep, goodness knows all that's right.
You take it out at night, say you play tough. And that baby will make your face so hard. I love you. And that's all you gonna cry. Well, if I can. Will make your face so hard. I love you. If I can find.
You just be out in the forest, why you think old bring me back?
I can give it out of the forest. They got me in bed out there.
So we had to get to that part because it's the whole reason that this presentation is called The Lady Bears. So Esther Phillips produces in 1953 a song called Double Crossing Blues that you just heard. And Big Mama Thornton hears that song. And she is inspired. I don't know what to do about it. You've seen the struggle. You know what it is. I guess my ears are built for this. Check.
Can we use this instead?
Let's see. I think it might. Check. 1, 2, 1, 2, check. 1, 2.
Can you give me the other one? I'll switch real quick.
I'm really invested in this jam. But I don't think it's built for my ear.
Let's try that one.
Check 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, check.
Just take that from me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Where was I? Oh, Double Crossing Blues. Right. So Big Mama Thornton's out there in Texas. She's just relocated to Texas, and Esther Phillips and the Johnny Otis Band is the hit. And in this vocal and this duet,
Esther Phillips says, you know, I'm going to go out there in the world and there's people out there and there are lady bears out there. And so I want to share with you what Big Mama Thornton says about that.
And I know the things that back and clothes, the back of my clothes, I ain't going on with it. You heard that? He said, oh yeah. Johnny always wants you to travel on the road with him. I said, oh, that'd be nice. So I can get a chance to meet you less. And we'll
Ever play that in the house?
Oh, you kidding?
That one.
Oh, man. I sung down there with them. Johnny was on the show with me. Went back and take a part in the Ace review. That's what we have. And close to the long show. And I went back, everybody, you know, come with me. Email Fitzgerald me there. And Sarah Vaughn was coming in for the next week, LLD. She coming in next week. She came down. She got that look. She came. Things in the back of clothes. The back of my clothes, I ain't going on with it.
So Johnny Otis, and this is a common theme that's happening throughout these narratives, is that there's this moment when people have to act. And in this case, Big Mama Thornton, Willie Mae Thornton at that time, Johnny Otis comes to town and they're like, let's go. And she says, well, you know, I want to go out because I want to hear what's going on with the lady bears out there. I want to know about Esther Phillips and what she's doing out there. And so now this is an interesting subtext. As a queer woman looking for our history and our music, I think it's particularly compelling that Big Mama Thornton or Willie Mae Thornton at that point is like compelled to go out because she wants to hear what the lady bears are doing out there. Now, you know, Big Mama Thornton's older than Esther Phillips, right? Significantly older, so it's a little weird in some ways if there is a sexual undertone. But there's all kinds of sexual undertone going on at this time. This is not to condone it. But at the same time, we see Big Mama Thornton participating in some of the same kinds of ways and some of the same kind of underlying sexual innuendo that is happening at that time. Again, not to excuse it, but this is also the impulse. This is the reason that she says, I'm ready to hit the road and go, because she's like, well, I'm not packing my bags. She's going to see what the lady bears are out there doing. So whether there's kind of some kind of sexual undertone, there's also at the same time a significant connection between women's cultural production and the musical production. And this is what this song right here and Esther Phillips and Johnny Otis is what prompts her to go on. So anything you'd like to say about that?
No.
Understandably. And then we hear her talk about her relationship with Sarah Vaughan, and I want to start that.
You ever play that in the house there?
Oh, you kidding?
That one.
Oh, man. I sung down there with them. Johnny was on the show with me. Went back and take Thornton and Ace review. That's what we have. And the coast was on the show. That's a big pack. Everybody, you know, come with me. Email Fitzgerald me there. And Sarah Vaughn was coming in for the next week, LLD. She coming in next week. She came down, she got there early, she came down for the show. And come back in, almost threw me down. I said, whoa. I said, oh, Vaughn, what's wrong with you? She said, I've been wanting to see you. I heard your record. Said, but it's the first time I heard you in person. I said, I've seen you a lot of times in person. On TV shows. And here I come in. we were sitting at the stage over right across the street. I was getting in upstairs. And I come down to the restaurant to eat. And that's when I ran into Ella. Oh, she said stole my house though.
So she, Ella Fitzgerald tells her, just keep on doing what you're doing. And so what I wanted to ask you, I was about to call you Pink, but I'd like to ask you, Meagan, is what has your relationship been with other, because Big Mama Thornton talks about her impulses to produce and to engage in the artistic process because of women who are in her cohort, right? This is not just about the predecessors that we'll talk about coming up, but what has been your relationship with co-producers, other artists that are contemporarily, other women artists that are contemporarily producing simultaneously with you?
I think it's been very heavily, it's over the course of my entire career, it's been very heavily involved and engaged with other women creatives from the start with Fire. And then Fire birthed so many people here creatively in Kalamazoo because it was one of the only places, and I really cannot think of another place that was like Fire. It was one of the only places where we were allowed to develop our voice and to experiment and to host shows where it didn't cost a ton of money to, or overhead that we just did not have to produce shows. And so we were able to really build even at an early stage. So Yolanda Lavender, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, DCMC, Truth Tone, that whole camp. And I was kind of bopping along, you know, but we were family, we still are in a lot of ways. And then that only continued when I got to Chicago. I find that there's this misconception that, oh, women can't get together, they're catty, they don't support one another. It's just so untrue. It's just not true. My experiences with that have been so far and few in between that I can't even like conceptualize that. I can't tell you the number of people who I've literally walked onto my gig when I just feel like, I maybe need to move on to something else. Let me bring another younger woman creative into the space, and people have done the same thing for me. I mean, I can name names in Chicago, which y'all might not know the folks, but like Soraya, and then there's a beautiful vocalist named Alicia Monique, and sometimes I get flack about this, I'll be honest, let me talk about it since I got the mic. Like, here you go. Sometimes I get flack for talking about how influential and really life-changing strong women have been in my life. And typically that flack comes from men who feel like I'm downing men for really highlighting women, but I'm highlighting my story, you know, and it's like from outside of music, I was raised by really incredibly strong women, starting with my grandmother, who told us stories about how she worked for the Cook County Department of Corrections in the 50s. And she went in for her interview, and she was wearing a skirt, and they said, okay, you gotta get down and do your physical part of the test. And she said, well, I hitched that skirt up and I did those push-ups and hit those jumping jacks. And that's how she provided for our family. So there was never an instance where the women in my life have been afraid to just like go out and get it and support one another. And that's just how we survive. And so it is nice to hear that encouragement again. The more things change, the more they stay the same.
So do you have a point of meaningful intersection with Big Mama Thornton?
Okay, so I was looking this up now because, you know, you're the historian here. I looked up, They Call Me. Was that in the 50s?
They Call Me Big Mama.
Beautiful, let's do it. Just the blues. weigh 300 pounds. Yeah, they call me Big Mama 'cause I weigh 300 pounds. I can rock and I can roll and I can really go to town. Satisfied this morning if you take me home with you. Satisfied this morning if you take me home with you. You never know, blue, 'cause I know what to do. Say they call me Big Mama 'cause I weigh 300 pounds. Almost. Say they call me Big Mama 'cause I weigh 300 pounds. I can rock and I can roll, and I can really go to town.
Yeah. All these ladies do it proud.
So one of the things that I think is really important is the intersections. Check 1, 2, 1, 2. Check, check, check. All right, so I used to be a professor back in the day. And my mother, we'll give a special shout out to her. My mother was a school teacher, and she taught kindergartners. So I think I did learn how to project my voice some. So can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Check 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, good. All right, so that's good. So Esther Phillips, Big Mama Thornton, and Etta James all engaged with the Johnny Otis Band. The Johnny Otis Band becomes a incredible contributor to what's happening with R&B and soul and blues at that time. And so all of these women engaged with that quintet that Johnny Otis put together. And Etta James, so we have first Esther Phillips, check 1, 2. First we have Esther Phillips, then Big Mama Thornton comes and joins the Johnny Otis Band. And then at the age of 15, Etta James talks about her engagement with the Johnny Otis Band and the fact that she was involved with a group called the Peaches. And Peaches there on the right. Originally called the Creolettes. Check. Originally called the Creolettes. And then Johnny Otis, there's a fantastic interview with Johnny Otis and Esther Phillips, where Esther Phillips shares that the moment when Johnny Otis gave the Peaches their name and gave her name. And it's really incredible. If we had more time, I would like to share it. But Johnny Otis doesn't even remember the moment. Johnny Otis doesn't even remember the moments when he gave the Peaches the name and gave Etta James her name, but Etta James in this interview with him, when she goes in to talk with him during a radio interview, she repeats what that story was, that he doesn't even recollect, how she got her name, how the Peaches got their name. And so she starts out with them, and the Peaches, they come to town, and someone from the Peaches calls Etta James and says, Johnny Otis is down here, he wants to hear from us, come on down. And Etta James is like, what? Yeah, sure, right? But she eventually does come downtown and auditions for Johnny Otis and decides to go off with Johnny Otis and writes a letter, right? So Johnny Otis is like, look, you're like 15 years old. You can't be coming on this road without permission from your mother. And Etta James says like, oh, I don't know where to find her or whatever, but I can get a letter. So she goes home, writes a letter, and leaves town. And this is a kind of common theme. I don't know if you've ever left town, Meagan, but a lot of these women, as young women, are making this decision to follow their dreams like that. And so that's some of the background for Etta James. But then in 1955, after being engaged with the Johnny Otis Band, she produces what anybody who's seen the Cosby Show.
Always let go. Now when it comes to moving, then you have to go where
So you're getting a little vibe of what the music sounded like in the 50s, right? From this phonograph experience. And so it's a little crackly, but yeah, it's authentic. It's like the real vibe. So yes, WOMAN by Etta James. And this becomes one of her entry points, and again, becomes one of the classics that folks, especially Black women, feel like they need to replicate. But I do want to talk about Etta James.
Women are like supposed to be too busy and too cool, too nice, and housewives and things. It's just like in the old days when they said the women couldn't smoke. But now it's like, it's kind of like a women's, at least I'm a feminist. I'm not like carried away, but I like to do anything that a guy does in that way, you know, whatever.
So you heard what she had to say, right? She's like, I can do anything that a man can do. I'm going to express myself in the same kind of ways. I can talk about knocking down somebody, hitting somebody over the head. And she says quite clearly here, I'm a feminist. As Black women, since even, before Alice Walker had to qualify their feminism, she's like, I'm not going overboard or anything, but I'm a feminist, right? And so I think that Etta James' focus on this component of feminism and the authentic expression of Black women's experiences, regardless of kind of gender identity. I want to talk a little bit more and have you in conversation with Etta James, but
You had a roller coaster for life. You can take that like, a couple of women, I can take that and say, but if I didn't have a roller coaster, how would I know? How would I be able to sing about the things? How would I be able to feel what I'm singing about? How would I be able to hear someone sing a song and brings tears to my eyes? Why? Because I feel it, because I understand it. And you know what? If I had my life to live over again.
so this is, I love that Etta James is talking about the ways in which she's embracing the range of experiences and the highs and lows, and that connects up so significantly to me through her articulation of her experience with Billie Holiday. Let me share that.
But I always loved Billie Holiday. And as a child, my mother was a real jazz lover and everything, and so I had been through those same experiences, and I said, hey, I gotta do this. And I'm not gonna try to do it like Billie Holiday. I just wanna put that same feeling in the air, you know what I mean?
You remember the first time you saw her?
Yeah. Matter of fact, it was here in New York City. And I think it was for NBC, but it was NBC Radio at the time. And they had a show that they called the show Jazz plus Soul equals Blues. And I didn't know which one I was. I was about 17 or 18 years old. And Count Basie was there, myself, and Billie Holiday was coming. I remember waiting for her to come and talk to me. Lady Day. And I sat there and we waited. She was late. And finally, the doors were open. And there she was. Lady Day, just like, Billie Holiday. And she came to the door, and there were two men with her, one on each side.
Hold her elbow.
Yeah, they were helping her with the elbows. And she was walking in very slowly, and I was looking at her from her head to the top of her, from her toes to her head. And I looked and I noticed her feet, she had on these spaghetti strap shoes, and her feet were very swollen. And so then I realized they were really helping her to walk. And then when she sat down about 2 seats away from me, and I didn't want to really stare at her, but I kind of looked, my eye at her, and I looked at her hands, and her hands were like boxing gloves. That's the closest I can think about it. And then she looked at me, and we finally locked eyes. And she said to me, she said, "You look at me?" She had that grappling in her voice. And I said, "Yeah." And long did this ever happen to you? And that's what was so strange. It was like, because I wasn't into drugs, or I wasn't into, I just was a young girl who started singing and loved her as part of the women that I loved in show business. And, but I remember when I later on became addicted, all of that flashback for me is like, how can she like it?
I don't want to focus because so many people are focused on Billie Holiday's health and her relationship with drug addiction. And there's so many things to think about Billie Holiday in addition to that struggle that she faced. But this moment when Etta James meets her for the first time, and there's this instructive moment that we know then Etta James had her own struggles as she continued. It's such a critical moment, I think, for her life. And so I wonder now, again, not necessarily addressing the role of addiction, but you talked about your cohorts, but we have these ancestors and these predecessors that are so significantly impacting Etta James and other women vocalists. I wondered if you might talk about who some of those predecessors might be, in addition to perhaps the folks that we have here that we're listening to today.
I've always spent a lot of time from being a very young girl with elders. It is one of my very favorite things to do. Even now, because I think that the right elders, we can learn so much from. And it's making me a little teary to just see how they never met before, but Billie felt like she needed to wrap her arms around her in that moment. Even if it was to say, don't become me, I love you that much, this is not about ego, don't ever let something like this happen to you. And I'm trying to think of times that folks have done that for me. One, and I feel like I'm always searching for a mentor. I'm like always searching for a mentor, and maybe we've lost a little bit of that in like the apprentice kind of way, you know, but I have had moments of mentorship, like these moments of mentorship like that one. There's a vocalist by the name of D. Alexander in Chicago that I really look up to, and she always encourages me along. She's another person. If she couldn't do a gig, she referred me, which is like the greatest honor. It's like, I get to be D for a day. And she'll always say, no, you don't get to be D for a day, you're Meagan, and you will even surpass, you know? But I think that's so important, especially I can't imagine, I've not had any experience with drug addiction, but I am very close to people who have, and I know we're not necessarily focusing on that, but I guess what I'm saying is in community, when there is a struggle in that culture, at the time, a lot of folks struggled in that way. And I think what she was offering to her was some community, even if to say, don't allow this to happen to you because, and I see you, like I love you, I see you, and avoid this.
That's beautiful. And so we talked a little bit about Etta James and her influence on your work, and we kind of settled on, it might not be a 1950s piece, but what this piece, this conversation that we're engaged in is so much about legacy. And I wondered if you might want to share that while I check to see if this is going to play 33s. This is really good at playing 78s, okay? Which is hard to find something that plays 78s. 33 and a thirds is another issue, but we'll check to see. But yeah, let's, Etta James, I know you have a couple.
Okay, I'm gonna give this one a shot.
Come on.
Something told me it was over when I saw you and her talking. Something deep down in my soul said, cry, girl. When I saw walking. Ooh, I would rather go blind, boy, than to see you walk away from me. See, I love you so much, don't want to watch you walk away, baby. But most of all, I just don't want to be free. Ooh, baby, 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 I'd rather go blind than to see you walk away from me. Baby, 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 I'd rather go blind, boy, than to see you walk away from me.
So I love that song especially because Coco Taylor, that many of you might know, then comes and picks up that song and even deepifies. I know that's not a word, I got a PhD. But she deepifies the blues in I'd Rather Go Blind and kind of memorializes that. Now, there have been a lot of discoveries for me in this process. Again, Esther Phillips, I knew, but I didn't know the extent of her impact. I knew Gloria Lynn, I knew a number of folks. Starr is someone who I've never heard of before. And as I did the deep dive, I found out that Starr was a significant contributor for about 30 decades. She started in the 1940s. As when you might be able to hear her share this, she was 3/4 Indigenous and 1/4 Irish, and her experiences of that cultural location became significant in many of the conversations that she had. I fell in love with Starr over the course of this process because she was incredibly engaging and personable, and you can only imagine the kinds of things that she had to navigate in the course of her career, particularly the understandings that these interviewers, because I was going in deep on these conversations that people were having with her, and the conversations particularly of white men when they were interviewing her brought out some very interesting kinds of dynamics I'd like to share. But first, I would like to share a little bit of her music. She started in the realm of country and expanded through blues, expanded through jazz, worked with Coleman Hawkins and Nat Cole. She was real radical, really radical. Worked with Nat King Cole and all the jazz greats, and if we have more time, I'd share that moment when she walks into a recording session with all these people and talks about she was in heaven. She said, I was in heaven before my time because all of these jazz greats were there, and she said they were looking at me in this conversation. But let me share a little bit quick, because I'm not going to even, well, let's try it. I'm not going to mess with it. What I love about Starr's work is her blend of the genres and rooting, as we know, country music in R&B and soul music. And so from a very early time in her life, she starts to blend those genres.
But I want to talk a little bit about some of the pieces that she encountered as she went out into the world. Her first audience, let me back up, her first audience were the chickens in her yard. And she talks about how she would go out and she would sing, and people were kind of tired of her singing, so she would go out and sing to the chickens. And she said the chickens were the best audience she ever had, because they're like, whoop, 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 whoop. But she said she would set up whole shows for the chickens. And you know, as someone who's very interested in environmentalism and the roots of relationships with nature, we see actually Esther Phillips was working out in the garden and with the chickens, and so was Etta James. So there's a real theme of chickens, which I did not explore in this curatorial process, but I think it's particularly fascinating that many of these artists, we won't talk about Della Reese in this context, but they're creating their own audiences, right? They're creating their own stages, whether it's for Chicken or Della Reese later on, creating a position for herself as a leader in the youth choir to be able to orchestrate having an audience. These young women, and I don't want to emphasize too shortly the fact that many of these women that are participating in the cultural arts are 15 years old and 18 years old and in their early 20s, as you've probably been able to see, and Starr is no different. But she also is coming up against a number of issues. And very early, she meets Glenn Miller. Some of you might know who Glenn Miller is. He was a kind of an icon. And she talks about
At 15 years old, she has the privilege of working with Glenn Miller and talks about her first night on the bandstand.
I was just sitting there, and every time that they pointed at me, I got up and did something, you know, and that's the way it was. But with the Glenn Miller band, I remember looking at this man. I was stunned by him. When he walked up on the bandstand, every musician walked up on the bandstand. And there wasn't a few minutes in between or anything. These people knew when he got there, it was time for everybody to be there. He walked past me after I sang my first song. When
he walked past her after she was about to sing her first song and patted her on the head. And if you could, I wish we had the video of it. And she's like, but what's compelling about this to me is because she is still a young woman when she meets Glenn Miller for the first time, but she has been performing now for at least 3 or 4 years. And so she feels, even as a young woman in this moment, that this is an inappropriate relationship. This is an inappropriate and patronizing perspective. And whether it's because she's thinking about that later in her life, or she felt that at that point, it's not as clear to me, but she's understanding that there's something significantly wrong about this conversation that's happening.
Look at me, and I'm short, and I'm fat, and I'm dark, and I look like an Italian, and that's all it is. And the saying it was perfect. It was love at first sight.
Dixieland, tell me about Bob Crosby.
Bob Crosby.
Tell me about Dixieland.
I was on the road. I used to, every summer, I would go on the road with Joe Louis Band. I started when I was 13, and then when I was 14. But when you're dark and you're heavy, people don't know how old you are. And my mother traveled with me as my sister.
Your mother encouraged you in the business.
No, my mother was kind of shy and very sweet and dear, and she never pushed me or anything. But she wanted me to do whatever was going to right me. I'm being frustrated, I guess. And this seemed to be the thing. And Joe was so kind and good.
There are two significant conversations in there: body image and the ways in which she feels as though her darkness, her weight is, I don't even think, I see you ready to talk right now. Right?
Wait, this is who we're talking about, right?
This is who we're talking about.
Dark and heavy.
Dark and heavy.
That's wild. Wild. Okay.
But, so, K-Starr carries this, right? And one of the interviews that I'm not going to share because it's a little bit longer is the same interviewer. This is one of the most frustrating parts of this project, is the same interviewer says to her, "Your skin is so beautiful. Like I told you this last time." And she says, "It's because I'm Indian," right? And he says, "Well, that's okay. We'll get some fire water." And she tries to like circumvent this conversation by then saying that we don't have a lot going for us as Native American people, but at least we got skin. And so how much has that kind of conversation about race and body image shifted these 50, almost 60 years later?
Oh, God. I think about this from her perspective of like carrying that. Because when I first look at this image, I'm like, my God, what a stunning woman. Like, she is stunning. And it breaks my heart a little bit that she couldn't be president this day, because I think that we've made so many strides with body image and still so far to go. But I mean, I feel like we're in a space where people are holding folks accountable for body shaming, for any kind of image shaming, and to imagine that she felt, first of all, there's nothing wrong with dark or heavy, but to kind of carry it like a thing to be ashamed of when she's so beautiful to me. I think also there is a time that if you don't meet the societal standards of beauty, it's like this moment, right, where somebody tells you that. It's like, I'm walking around thinking I am super fine, I am fine, do you see me, I am fine, and then somebody says, ooh, you got a little extra roller, and you're like, wait a minute, I thought I was just perfect the way I was. And so I remember I can't remember who, it's like a blogger that was having this epiphany. She's like, I didn't realize I was ugly until somebody said, oh, you kind of, she thought she was the baddest thing walking around. And she is, but I think it just highlights how these projected images, like we internalize them, and then we carry them with us for our whole life, when really there is no standard of beauty. Like, everyone is beautiful, and I just really wish that she had the opportunity to feel that.
Is there anything you're feeling from K-Starr musically?
No.
You feel they're struggling out of music, is that what you're saying?
Well, no, I love her music, but I don't have anything prepared, unfortunately, for K-Starr, but yeah, I don't have anything prepared for her. But I kind of want to punch that guy. First of all, don't pat me on the head.
Oh yeah, there's a couple guys I want to punch in the process of this conversation. So I said that K-Starr was somebody who I really had never heard of before, and I am ashamed to say that I've never heard of Mabel Liston before this conversation. And though I had tacitly experienced Mabel Liston, and I'll share some of that with you later, but Mabel Liston, as I started to dig in to think about instrumentalists in this conversation, was someone who I encountered and really fell deeply, deeply in love with her work and some of her struggle. And again, so we're going to bypass the record player and share a little bit about her only solo album. She partnered with just about everybody in the jazz scene. This is her solo album. And so I'll let it play in the background, but I should say that when I first kind of found Mabel Liston, I talked to Jessica Ivey, who is a vocalist here in Kalamazoo and in the Detroit area. She's like, oh yes, I love Mabel Liston. Me and Michelle Holloway have been talking about Mabel Liston. Again, two incredible vocalists that have roots here in Southwest Michigan and are kind of picking up on the legacy that Mabel Liston has passed on to us, which is so exciting to me that the 20-somethings are on the nation, onto Mabel Liston before I even got there. There's hope in the world. Significantly in this collection by Mabel Liston and her bones, she did not have a trumpet player. She refused to have trumpet players because of her experience playing in the brass line with male trumpet players who consistently downgraded her, suggested that her skills were not on par, even though consistently she proved that was not the case. But so, as a result, she had a bone to pick with trumpet players and specifically excluded them from this recording. Now, I did spend a lot of time in band after my senior year, but I'm not going to talk about trumpet players. I think do we have any in the audience? Okay. Now, Mabel Liston is especially important to me, not just because I didn't know about her and didn't know about the work that she had contributed, but that she traveled with Billie Holiday and had much of her kind of rooted experience in the 1940s. She started in the 1940s, and so by the 1950s, she's established as a musician and as an early composer. And so I'd like to share with you a little bit about her background, and because this is a process of discovery to me, I'd like to share a little bit of her process of discovery.
My teacher wanted to start a band, and my mother took me to a music store, and I saw the trombone, and that was it.
So she's saying she's out with her mom, she sees a trombone, and that was it. After seeing that trombone, she asked her mom about the trombone, her mom buys it for her, and that is how this continues for her in her process of musical discovery. I want to share, though, that her process is not just kind of the system of being supported by her mother, but she's navigating these experiences of teachers that are trying to engage her in the learning process around her music, but she's discerning, as she expresses even early in her life. She says, I had a teacher, but he wasn't right. He was an old soul brother, and I realized that he was no good. I guess my mama found him somewhere, and he wasn't right. I don't know how I knew, but I knew. So I said no, cancel, and I just went on my own. I was always good in my ears, so I could play by ear. I didn't think of anything else. And this is juxtaposed the experience she has with an orchestra teacher called Alma Hightower, where she says she was an orchestra teacher leading an orchestra. This is from an interview that she engaged with. 14 or 15 pieces. She played drums and piano. She would be in the playground from 2 o'clock to something or other, and then she would carry on with us when that was over. I started with her, 1938 or something. Some of my friends who were going to school with me said, come and meet Miss Hightower, and that was it. She was okay as a music teacher. She was just okay. And I loved her. I would stay with her from time to time. She was all right. So what I love about this is Mabel Liston as a child is making a very clear distinction between this man, there's something not right about him. I don't know what it was, but I'm going to align myself with this other person, with Alma Hightower, who comes out to the playground, right? So that when we talk about youth engagement and relationship with the arts, she's going to the playground. She's going to the place where young people are participating in their day-to-day life and then working with them. I wonder if you might talk some about that.
About the engagement with youth, like.
Engagement with youth and like how one discerns. You talked a little bit about it before when you suggested, you like the rose-colored glasses, but how do you navigate these elements that Mabel Liston's talking about, the range of them?
I think a lot of it is, there's two things. There's like the seen and the unseen. Our intuition is such a huge part of our nervous system that I think sometimes we silence. I really do try to, as best I can, listen to that. You can kind of tell when people are right, when they're not all right. But if I can't, then I really do try to listen or see what people's actions are as opposed to what they're saying. Because there's a lot of people that speak very well. We're gonna have this and we'll pay you this amount and then yada yada. And then the deposit is late, like super late. It was like, I'm not gonna show up for that because if the deposit was late, who knows if the check will arrive? And then also, so in Chicago, you think there's so many creatives every week, the creative scene in Chicago is vast, but it's not as big as you think it is, and word travels fast, am I right? Like if you know that there's been some shady business, you learn from history to how to navigate the future. And so, super short story, guy called me, I never heard of him a day in my life, and said, hey, Meagan McNeal, I'd like to get you on this gig, and it pays X amount of dollars, which was significantly lower than what my fee is. I said, I'm not gonna be able to do it at that rate. I'd be paying to do your gig because of the things that I have to pay for. And immediately, he said, well, I hadn't heard of you anyway. This person referred me to you, and I didn't even know who you were. Pick up my phone, edit contact, do not answer. Exclamation, exclamation. So anytime he calls me, I just know off the bat not to answer the phone. And so that's the scene, right? I didn't need to pick up on his vibe. He showed himself. And what do they say? When people tell you who they are, you believe them. And then, so I think that those are just ways that I've been, I guess, navigating.
Thank you. We're in a Me Too movement right now, and people are much more aware of the ways in which women have been exploited through the music industry, the film industry, for every industry. And Mabel Liston, out of all of the vocalists and all of the musicians, is the only one who said anything about that. And so I want to refer you to this picture up in the top left-hand corner. This is her with Dexter Gordon. This image, I don't need to say anything about Dexter Gordon, but this image turns my stomach, given this conversation where she says, rapes and everything. I've been going through that stuff for all my life. I just go to the doctor and tell him, and that was that. Anyway, I don't even want to hear about it. I don't want to talk about that. It was all right when I started going with Gerald, I was okay, Weston, but I had support. Then it was better because I had his support, so I didn't have to worry. But then I left in 1955 and went back to Dizzy's band, and it was the same thing all over. Yeah, well, it's abroad and she's by herself, that's that. But the older I got, the less it happened, she laughs. I don't know how old I was, but it stopped altogether. And so this conversation with Mabel Liston in many ways overshadowed my conversations, like figurative conversations with people like Etta James and Esther Phillips, because I wonder, we don't know, right? But we do know that this was a tenor, and Mabel Liston was the only person that I've seen that was brave enough to come out and say that it happened. And so again, conjecture on anyone else's part, but we do know, and I'm thankful to Mabel Liston for bringing that forward as a dynamic. And so we have our last performer for tonight, and that is Della Reese. And thank you for being patient, because again, this is a lot of information to get through. But Della Reese is from Michigan. She was born and raised in Detroit, and has a very rooted connection between jazz, blues, and R&B here in this country. She established standards just like little Esther did, and she was involved with critical communities in Detroit and the national realm. Oh, let me just say real quickly, Mabel Liston partnered with everybody. Betty Carter gives her credit. Gloria Lynn, that I mentioned earlier, she composed and arranged this album with Gloria Lynn called Lonely and Sentimental, and Tis Autumn was one of those cuts. But Della Reese, let me accelerate here to Della Reese from Detroit. She participated in some of the significant communities in Detroit, particularly the Flame Show Bar. That was a place that artists from all over the country came through, but also those artists from Detroit and these cultural producers like Arthur Braggs, Ziggy Johnson, a number of folks that were participating in Detroit that were connected to a circuit. The circuit was a circuit that included Chicago, Detroit, Ottawa, Boston, Montreal, St. Louis, and the Ottawa Review that Della Reese participated in was one of those. And so she talks about the impact, not just of the show environment, but also the impact of Mahalia Jackson. She traveled with Mahalia Jackson as a very young woman. And so I want to share with you some of her conversation about her relationships to Mahalia Jackson and...
She was pregnant, and we didn't have air conditioning at that time. We had the funeral homes gave the churches fans, and this was a very hot day in July, and there was no breeze blowing or anything, and the lady fainted, and they took her to the pastor's study, and there happened to be a doctor there in the audience, and he was a member of the church, and he told us and discovered that the lady was pregnant, and her husband told Mahalia, who had, I think, 3 engagements in the South, that he would not allow his wife pregnant to go into the South, because at that time, Black people were not welcome into hospitals, and many people had died because there was no space for them, there was nobody to take care of them. And he said he wanted his child to live and his wife too, and so she could not go. And so the ministers asked my mother if I could go. At that time I was a lyric soprano, and so was this lady. And they asked my mother if I could go and do those 3 jobs with Mahalia. And my mother allowed me to go. Mahalia was magnificent. I didn't particularly like her because she didn't let me do what I wanted to. I thought when I got away from my mother on the road, I'd be able to, get down, break it loose, and do all the stuff that she would let me do. And Mahalia was stricter than my mother was. It was a different experience because I was with different people. I was doing different things, but it was not an astounding, marvelous, what I've been dreaming of situation. It gave me a chance to learn the art of communication. That's the best I got out of it.
So she gets to work with an icon like Mahalia Jackson. She's like, it wasn't all that. And there have been, I think we might have talked about it, there have been folks that have looked out for you, put their arm around you. And so there's some resonance, I would say, with what Della Reese is sharing. I'd like to share with you one of my favorite Della Reese compositions, and it's, I think, a Cole Porter composition called The More I See You. And Della Reese, again, stepped on the scene and made this become a standard, because it really wasn't.
The more I see you, the more I
Somehow this feeling just grows and grows with every sigh.
I've listened to every version of The More I See You that preceded Della Reese, and she changed the game for this song. Anything you'd like to share about?
I think I never engaged with Della Reese as a singer. I always engaged with her as an actress. And so this project really, kind of just blew me away with how masterful she is. And I really look forward to digging into more of her catalog just to see some of the stuff that she's done and how dynamic she is. I mean, she's stunning. I mean, we know Della Reese from You Shot Off My Pinky Toe. that generation, but it was just really wonderful to see the depth and breadth of her talent and her gift.
Any interpretation of Della Reese?
No, I am not worthy just yet. I need to do my research.
Well, what I'd like to do, because I thank you all so much for rolling with us 26 minutes past when this was supposed to end. But I'd like you to tell me how you think we could shorten this into less time. But I wondered if there's anything that any kind of closing vocals, any closing conversation that you would like to bring to this piece as we wrap it up?
Well, I know we had initially, again, 6 hours drilled down to 6 vocalists. But I know we were talking a little bit about Nina in this space, right? So could I close with maybe a Nina piece?
Yes.
So one of my favorite Nina Simone songs is called Ne Me Quitte Pas. And during the pandemic, we kind of created our own arrangement of it, which won't be able to really hear how it sounds without the instruments. But I want to do that for you because I studied like 2 days of French and I want to share it with y'all. Okay, so. Ne me quitte pas, il faut oublier tout, pas oublier qui s'enfuit déjà. Oublier le temps des malentendus doués, le temps perdu, à savoir comment oublier ces heures qui tuaient parfois, corps de pourquoi n'a cœur de bonheur. Ne me quitte pas, ne me quitte pas, ne me quitte pas. Moi je t'offrirai de peur de bruit, de bruit. Oui, elle ne pleut pas. Je creuserai la terre jusqu'après ma mort pour couvrir ton corps dans les lumières. Je ferai la mousse là-bas, où te serre l'oreille. Ne me quitte pas, ne me quitte pas, ne me quitte pas, ne me quitte pas.
Well, I want to give a special thanks to a number of people. Belinda Tate, the executive director here of the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts, for the opportunity to spend this time as a DJ for a very long time as DJ Disobedience, to be able to dig very deeply into the legacy that these women have passed on and to be able to have that opportunity has been really incredible. And Shannon Carroll for rolling with us as we have put this piece together. Thank you for picking up the mic, for figuring out how to rig everything. I also want to thank Denise Miller, our archivist, for the Institute of Public Scholarship that found these pieces of vinyl and this lovely phonograph, and is doing incredible work with the Institute of Public Scholarship to help us remember and archive our histories and our multiple layers of experience. And this helps me remember we need to preserve these pieces of vinyl. Also, Mr. William Vanden Dries, I think I emailed him this morning to make sure I have his name right. He provided the access to the Big Mama Thornton interviews and some Esther Phillips interviews at the drop of a dime quite often. And I love archivists. Any of you who are historians know that archivists that their moment to shine is when you say, can you find? And they're like, yes, here's all of it. And so I have a deep love for archivists. Carlene Gill, the picture that you saw of Arthur Braggs was one of the dancers for the Idlewild Review, and is an incredible archivist gathering experiences from her time dancing as an Idlewild Review participant and all of the context of that. And so we've seen some of that. And then finally, I thank my parents, right? The musicians in my family. My father was a jazz bass player and a drummer here in Kalamazoo, Chicago, New York. And it's because of them that I met Esther Phillips, not literally, but musically. And then I created a new term. It's called my cramly, my crew and my family, and many of them are here. And it's those folks that cram all of my life into one little life that I have, and are with me through this last process. And so thank you all for being here, the people who are joining us for this conversation. Kick into that 6-hour playlist. It will lift you, it will elevate you, it will ground you, and listen to it as you experience the incredible exhibit. And we didn't talk about the connections between what's happening in that visual arts world, where we see a lot of extraction of Black experience, and then the rearticulation of it in art, or people of color's experience and the rearticulation of it in art, and then we see these artists claiming it back, taking it back. And so this work is a really beautiful conversation between this volume of artistry that came out of women's experiences in the 1950s, juxtaposed to what we were told about what was happening for women in the 1950s, where they're supposed to be at home taking care of their children in the kitchen, barefoot and pregnant. These women visually, these women audibly are showing us something very different about the tropes of womanhood in the 1950s. And I thank you, Meagan, I thank you all for being here to reinterpret a decade in ways that center women's creativity and women's authenticity and their contribution to the arts that we still are embracing and are benefiting from. So thank you all so very much.
Thank you to Dr.